Hi, welcome back to the channel. We've got some good stuff for you today. We're going to learn to do a power audit like a pro. The important thing about a power audit like a pro is first we have to understand how power measurements work. So we're going to go through those, discuss them, make sure we understand them. Second, we're going to go in and do a where do you get these power measurements from. We're going to learn how to get them from your house, learn how to get them from your trailer, learn how to get them from a wall plug, learn how to get them from a 50 amp outlet. We're going to go through all of them one by one so that we understand where they all come from. And then we're going to do the bonus round. And in the bonus round, we're going to go through and size a solar battery based on what we learned from step one and step two and use real examples to come up with what it is. This is what it's all about here. This is where you learn how big of a battery system you need to support the lifestyle you want to live with your solar system. All right, let's get started. We got a lot of work to do. I'm glad you could join me. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you find this content good. And for those that have already liked and subscribed, thank you so much. I appreciate every one of my subscribers, and we look forward to a lot more videos. We're getting started right now. All right, chapter 1. We're going to talk about how is power measured. This is a very important piece of the aspect here. I took some notes. I usually don't use notes when I do these. I usually do them right off the cuff with a very quick short list. This time I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. So we're going to walk through them one at a time. First, let's talk about watts. Now, a lot of people have this misconception about watts. Watts is the quantity of electricity immediately being used by a device. Let's say, for example, you have a refrigerator. All right? So your refrigerator is connected up to a power cord and plugged in, and it's using, let's say, 100 watts. Now, the question is, what does that mean? What it means is that constantly as time goes by, it is using 100 watts all the time. Now, it isn't a measurement of time, it's a measurement of an instance within time. So, for example, right now, I'm using 100 watts. That may go up or down, and it does go up and down within every electrical device that you have. That's what makes measuring electricity very difficult, because the more you sample it, and what I mean by sampling is that if you have watts over the period of an hour, and every second or every nanosecond within that hour, you're using a different amount of wattage, then at the end, how much power did you use? So, to make the math easy today, we're going to simplify this problem of having 1,000 little splices of electricity throughout an hour. And we're going to say that during the entire hour, we used 100 watts. The refrigerator came on, it started with exactly 100 watts, and 1 hour later, it was still using exactly 100 watts. That is what we call watt hours. That is 100 watt hours, meaning that you used 100 watts for exactly 1 hour. Now, that allows you to understand how you can measure power over time. This is why you're seeing all the videos on the internet that say watts don't matter, because technically they don't matter. What matters is how much of those watts you use consistently over a period of time. So watt hours is what's important here. Now, you'll frequently hear this terminology in a much bigger number. So what happens when this runs here for, let's say, 10 hours? That would be 10 times 100, and you would have 1,000 watt hours. So this is 1 hour, and this is 10 hours. And with 10 hours, you're going to have 1 kilowatt hour, meaning 1,000 watt hours as opposed to 1,000 watt hours. As you can see, they are exactly the same. This means that you used 100 watts for the duration of 1 hour. This means that you used 100 watts for the duration of 1 hour. Now, if you split this up into multiple pieces and you only used 100 here and 200 here and 50 here and 20 here, then obviously you can see the math can get very, very complicated. We're not going to take it to that level. We're going to simplify it because most of the ways that we're going to measure this the ways we'll learn to measure this in phase 2 will tell you either in watt hours or kilowatt hours how much electricity was used, and all of these 1,000 little splices and cuts and things like that have all been built into the tools that we'll use to identify this power. This concept, if you do not understand this concept, you should stop the video right now and you should rewind back to that section in the video and you should watch it again to make sure that you understand this piece, because this is very important. This is how you measure power. Now, let's take this to the next phase. And I'm assuming at this point you've got this piece, because this next piece will get very complicated if you do not understand that. So the next term that you hear a lot of out on the internet or when you get into the solar is people talk about amps. Amps are another form of measurement like watts, but they're basically associated to a battery. So let's talk about this. Let's say if you have a 12-volt battery and you were running 1 amp, that is equal to 1 watt for every volt in that battery. Therefore, you end up with 12 watts, and if this battery was to run for an hour, then you would burn 12 watt hours, and so on and so forth. You see how this works? Now, let's take this and do another example, because all of these measurement tools here in Chapter 1 are very important that you get them and that you understand them. I want to be very thorough with them. I don't want to waste your time, but I want to make sure you understand the concept. The second example I would give you is, let's take a 24-volt battery. Many people have 24-volt batteries, and you have 5 amps. You make that 5 where you can actually read it here. So you would see that represented at 24 volts at 5 amps. And what does that mean? That means that you've got 24 watts for each amp within that battery. And let's just do the math real quick. Should be 120, but let's make sure. 24 times 5 is 120. So this equals 120 watts of power being consumed. Now, what does it mean if you wanted to measure this over the period of an hour? We go back to the same thing that you did with watt hours, and you would say you have 5 amp hours. 5 amp hours with a 24-volt battery would equate to a measurement of 120. But it's more complicated than that, because the same mathematical formula, if you have a 24-volt battery and you run it at 10 amps, but you only run it for a half an hour, keep it in mind that since you're running it at 10 amps, you've got 240 watts. But instead of running it for 1 hour like you did here, you run it for 1/2 an hour here. That means that you've got that would mean that we take 240 watts and we multiply it for an hour, which would be the 10 amp hours, and then we would divide it by the 30 minutes, which would make it the same 5 amp hours. I hope that makes sense. I got a little bit fuzzy towards the end here on how this works, but I should probably give you one more example to make sure you understand it. Let's take a standard wall outlet. It's 120 volts. Now let me make sure this part is really clear. When we're talking watts, watts are watts are watts are watts. That means if it's a 12-volt battery, a 24-volt battery, 120 volt AC, DC, doesn't matter. A watt is a watt is a watt. And every device will use watts. Every device, those watts can be converted into watt hours. Those watt hours can be converted into amps, and so on and so forth. So we take 220 volts and we run at 1 amp equals 120 watts. Therefore, if you operate this for 1 hour, what do you end up with? You end up with 1 amp hour. 1 amp hour, remember, always equates back to the battery. And in this case, the battery voltage or the source voltage is 120. So you can take this formula and you can work it out multiple times, and you should come up with the same answer in each and every time. Now, this is the basic concept of how power is measured. It is really super important that you understand this concept before you move on to Chapter 2. If you don't, I suggest you go back and do it. Ask some questions in the forum. You post those questions down below. I'll make sure I get to you and respond to those very, very quickly so that you understand everything. I want to make sure this piece becomes very clear. And then we're going to move on to Chapter 2. All right. Congratulations for making it to this part. This part's the fun part. This is where we actually take some of the devices and we determine how you're going to be able to measure things. Measuring electricity at this point is very much a science, and so you'll need to understand the different types of things. Some of this is very easy. There are a lot of people who do these measurements in a manual calculation. And so you'll see here, I've got a bunch of different things that we can go over. We're going to go over a 120 volt plug, how you can do that. We're going to go over a 240 volt plug and how you can get to that. We're going to go over using the house meter. We're going to go over using your electric bill. And then we're going to talk about the worksheet first. The worksheet is a very simple way of doing it. There are a lot of resources online for this where you can go in and put it into the worksheet. And you're basically saying, look, I've got a refrigerator. With my fridge, it runs at 200 watts, and I've got a light that I'm going to use, and it runs at 20 watts for let's say 3 hours a day as I sit at night and I read. Then I have an AC unit that runs at 600 watts for 5 hours, and I set it on a timer so I can fall asleep and have a nice thing there. And then I have, let's say, you get the point. I could go through 100 different examples. So the fridge, the fridge, obviously, we leave on 24 hours a day. Let's go through some of the simpler items first. Let's take the light. The light is pretty easy because you know that it's going to be burning at 20 watts. And if you remember from Chapter 1, those fluctuations make it very complicated sometimes. But in the case of this light, it's very simple. We got 20 watts, and that means 20 watt hours times 3 hours is 60 watt hours for the light. So that one you could easily come along and say that you've got 60 watt hours that's going to be burned by your light each day. Now, when you get into the air conditioner and you get into a fridge, these are where things become much more complicated. If you had LEDs, or you have a blender that you're going to turn on for 5 minutes every day, or you have a coffee pot that you're going to brew coffee and you're going to turn it on, you're going to make your coffee and shut it off. You know, and that's actually a really good example. Let's do that one too. So let's say that you have a coffee pot And with a coffee pot, it'd say it's 1,500 watts, but it takes only 15 minutes to brew your pot of coffee and to get it out. So how would you go about calculating it for this particular item? It's pretty easy. You would take the 1,500 minutes. For me, I would take the 1,500 minutes and turn it into an hour, which basically means that for 1,500 watts, I'm going to have 1,500, I'm going to show my work over here, 1,500 watt hours, but there's 4 quarters in an hour, so I would divide that by 4, and I would come up with, couldn't have made the math easy and made it 400, 1,600. I had to use 1,500, didn't I? So we're going to say 1,500 divided by 4 for 15 minutes is 375 watt hours. So we know that the coffee is going to take us approximately 375 watt hours. And we also know that we do make coffee more than once a day, right? I mean, I know I do. So let's say that we make coffee 3 times a day. That means that this goes from 375, we multiplied it by 3 times a day, and we get 1,125 watt hours. So now we got 60 watt hours for a light bulb. We got 1,125 for our coffee pot, making coffee 3 times a day. 3 times a day. Now, let's get into the refrigerator and the air conditioner, because this is the complication by doing this. The complication with using this method is it's very difficult to understand when a refrigerator goes on and off. When you plug a refrigerator in, the compressor comes on and it cools the refrigerator down. So what's going to happen is if it says that it's rated for 200 watts, that means, let me see if I can clear out some space here. That means that at 200 watts, over the period of time, that refrigerator, as soon as it gets plugged in, it's going to jump from using 0 watts down here straight up to 200. And then it's going to run for a little while, and when it gets cold, it's going to drop back down to here and run and sit and wait until the thermostat kicks in and it has to run again. And then it's going to turn back on and it's going to be here and it's going to cool for a little while, probably not near as long as it did the first time because it doesn't have to cool it off. It only has to keep it cold now. So it'll run for a very short period of time and shut off. And then it'll sit and then turn back on. And then it'll come back off. The problem is understanding these ups and downs from a refrigerator is very difficult. So, knowing that it's going to use 200 watts when it runs isn't as easy as saying it's a light bulb. You can multiply it out by 24 hours and you could do all that math, but this calculation would not be right. So, saying that makes this method very difficult. Some people use base calculations to say it. I say that in a refrigerator and an AC unit, usually with a refrigerator, you can take this and I've just basically found out that a refrigerator, and these are my guesses based on what I've seen from them, this might be 1.2 kilowatt hours a day, meaning it's 1,200 kilowatt hours, meaning it's going to be very close to what your coffee pot uses for a refrigerator to run all day. That's possible. That's a basic math that I use in my food trailer for a refrigerator or a freezer. That is no use, locked up, sitting quietly, nothing being used. So please don't use that number for your calculations unless you really want to guess. Air conditioners really depend on the air conditioner. Is it a mini split? Is it a real air conditioner? Is it a window unit? Does it have cycling? Is it an inverter air conditioner? Is it not? This number can widely vary from anywhere from 1 kilowatt a day up to 10 kilowatts a day, depending on how warm it is, how cold it is outside, how hard it's working, how hard it's not working, how often you have the door open. All of these things are going to cause this cycle to increase when it becomes apparent you're running an air conditioner. This is why I hate the worksheet. It is fraught with mistakes and errors, and it's also asking the people that are least qualified. Today, you are going to be more qualified any day more than you are today to do this worksheet. Meaning, if I ask you to do it today, it's the most inaccurate solution I could ever ask you to do for a power audit. If I ask you next week, it will be better. If I ask you next year, it would be better, because you will never know less about calculating these power calculations than you do today. So that is why I hate using the worksheet. That is why I say this is just one big giant no-no, and nobody can use this for an accurate calculation for an audit. Now, can you use it to determine how much additional electricity you're going to get from a light bulb being on for 3 hours? Can you use it for, if you use one of the other techniques in conjunction with this? Absolutely, yes, you can. So let's move on to them, and let's call this a waste of time unless you figure out what some of these other items are through using another technique. So let's talk first about the 120 volt plug. Now this would assume that you're looking at using a device similar to this. What this is this is called a kilowatt. This is a generic version of Spartan. Usually what these things do is they allow you to measure the electricity going through the device. So then you would plug in your surge protector or whatever here, and this would allow you to measure that data electronically, and it would report back a kilowatt answer to you or a watt hour answer to you, telling you how much electricity is actually going through this device. Now, there are limitations. First of all, most of these devices are limited to 13 amps or 15 amps, meaning somewhere between 1500 and 1800 watts. And that means that if you run this at 1800 watts and it's calibrated for it, and it's a cheap knockoff, there's a good chance it won't be working when you get done. So keep that in mind, that if you're going to plug in a small refrigerator and you wanted to turn it on for a day or 2 days or 3 days in order to come up with how much power is going through this device, then that is a fantastic way to get that answer. Now, air conditioners are a little bit different. In this case, the small air conditioner, 600 watts, may work just fine. As long as the air conditioner fits within the specs of the device you're using, then you shouldn't have a problem using it to get that calculation and doing it. Now, this is pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy. These devices are cheap. The generic one, like this one's like 10 bucks. The name brand is like 30 bucks. They're really, really super cheap, and they're not that big of a deal. And they work really well, and you'll see it all the time out on the internet, people using them to calculate things. And you can use it to do this calculation, you can use it to do that calculation, and you can use it for lights, you can use it for basically, especially if you're living in a van, living in a small RV that's running off of a 15 amp plug or something like that, that just uses a small outlet from a house. This is a fantastic way for you to measure, not only to break down your worksheet, because your worksheet methods are not bad in general, because they allow you to know how much additional electricity you would need if you wanted to add a light, or you wanted to add an extra a coffee pot, or you wanted to add a fryer or something like an air fryer or something like that to the system that you have. What's going to be the impact? These things are fantastic so that you understand how to calculate them. So it's important you know how to do this, and I would suggest that you do practice it a little bit so you understand it. But this is a much more accurate way to get you a real figure of what those wall outlet plugs are going to do. Now, let's move on and talk a little bit about the bigger devices. So, for example, One of the items that I ran into was a 240 volt plug. This can be a 50 amp, what is it, a 1450 standard RV plug, a charger for your electric car. There's a lot of different things that use this plug. It's also quite frequently used for entertainment purposes, for running multiple lights and things for different devices. This, I will link you a device that I built up here somewhere, over here, over there, oh, there, over here. I'll link you a device up here in the corner that takes you to a device that I built, that I did the video for right before this video so that I could link it to you and show you how to build it. It is basically the equivalent of this device for the 110, but it's in a 220. Now, there's a parts list involved. There's a main building it and everything. It is a DIY device. If you're not really heavy into the DIY, you may want to look at some other solutions, and we do have a few of those, and I'll go through some of them also. But let's talk about this. This will give you, and I'm going to include a picture right here of what information you will see. And as from this picture, you can see there are 2 meter readings. And what it basically does is it takes the 240 and split phase and shows you 120 up here and 120 down here, and allows you to see how many kilowatts are being used, how many watt hours are being used, and when the watt hours go over 1,000, it switches to kilowatts. So you'll see that there. It shows you the actual voltage going in. It shows you, and because the voltage is used to derive how much wattage is actually there, because that depends on how many amps. You'll see the amps, the voltage, which will multiply out to equal the watts, and all the things that we talked about in the first chapter. You'll see that here in a display, and with the example I have on the screen, and you can use it to measure everything in a 240 instance. So far, we have done a standard 110, and we've done the 240. Now, I'm going to go into a couple of easier ways to do some of these things when you get into bigger things, and then I'm going to go back and revisit a couple of items at the very end that I left off of my list that I want to make sure I cover, because there are alternative solutions to measuring these type of things in a house, but I want to go through the easy ones first. The first one is the meter in the house. The meter in the house, if you go outside the house, hanging on the wall, and I'll include a picture of that right here, you'll see this meter, and you'll see at the top, I'm going to try to draw a line here. Oh, there we go. So you'll see that one at the top is the first meter reading, and then the one at the bottom is the second meter reading. And what this basically does is you can see how many kilowatts you've used up to a particular time, and then you can go back at another time and see it again. So if you wanted to know how many kilowatts you used during the day, you could take, for example, the reading of 6,572, and it may be 16,572 or some other number, because that's going to be there since the meter was installed on your house. And then you subtract the next reading that you get from the house. It says 16,672, meaning that over that period, you used 100 kilowatt hours. So this allows you to use the meter that the electric company is using to bill you, which I assure you they are not wrong, in order to calculate the number, unless of course the meter is broken. They are going to calculate the number of kilowatts for you, and all you have to do is just run your normal days, and you can break them down by day by day. A lot of electric companies nowadays allow you to log into a website and see that breakdown by day, by month, and so on and so forth. That leads us to the fourth option here, which is your electric bill. Your electric bill also usually contains, for the month, you being billed for X number of kilowatt hours, and it may have two numbers on here, and Y number of peak kilowatt hours, or it may be broken up like here in Florida where we have kilowatt hours plus a surcharge kilowatt hours, so it's broken into two pieces and you have to add them together. Either way, the electric bill is a good source also to give you an idea of where all of the content or where all the power that you're using, how much of it is. The problem with the electric bill is it's all added up by the month. The house meter is a much better way of doing it, or even the website is a much better way of doing it. You still have the problem of you can't see individual devices. You can't see what this plug pulled. You can't see what this outlet pulled. You can't determine what that light bulb used or this or that. So you may want to use in conjunction your electric bill to get the total to know the whole thing, or you may want to use the plug that you've got your van plugged into, or the battery that you're using or whatnot to calculate that. So the last item here that I want to go over is going to be the Shelly device. Now, Shelly is only one of many different types of metering devices that you can install in a DIY situation. And since this is a DIY channel for solar power and electricity, I'm going to show you one of the items that I use to do that. I'm going to include a picture of the Shelly device right here, and then I'm going to include a couple of pictures of actual installations. I've got one of another video that I recently did that shows you the Shelly devices being installed in the breaker panel. I'll include that. But what this device does is it allows you to monitor the different usage of a particular outlet. I use it in my RV, I use it to monitor my hot water heater. I've got several breakers that run into my kitchen that runs my refrigerator. I've got other breakers that run into my kitchen that runs the island, I think it's called, and the island has my espresso machine and anything that I've got plugged in near the sink or the island in the middle of the RV. That allows me to do that. I've also got one that hooks up to both of my mini splits, the one in the bedroom and the one in the main unit. Those allow me to monitor the electricity usage there. So as you can see, and then I think I even have another one in my bay where all my electrical stuff, my solar equipment is, to monitor how much usage I get from all the different equipment I use for monitoring and stuff. I'll include a couple of pictures here of the solar home assistant where it shows you the monitoring usage and stuff there so that you can see that. Just real quick so that you understand what it looks like and how you could get that information. So this is a combination, and by no means is all of the ways to measure this information. It is the way I've been doing it because I feel it's the most accurate. It allows me to go in and look at a plug here, a bigger plug here, a house meter here, an electric bill here. It allows me to go in and take the electric bill and to break that down and show me what the usage within one. It allows me to take my entire RV and then break the plugs down within the RV to know. Last week or yesterday, I used 21 kilowatt hours, and on the one that was in my espresso machine, I had 1.3 kilowatts. The air conditioner, my wife likes it cold at night, runs all night at 61 degrees. It allowed me to see that 2.9 kilowatts was used in the evening for that. It also allows me to know during the day when I'm working, I like it nice and cool. It allows me to see that 5.6 kilowatts was used during the day to run the air conditioner in the main cabin to keep me and my puppies cool. So this by no means is a complete and total answer to every option that's out there. There are all kinds of monitoring devices in addition to Shelly that allows you to hook up to your box inside your electrical outlet and monitor each of the circuits, and they all come down to the same thing. They're all going to give you that magic kilowatt hour answer that you're looking for. How many kilowatt hours did you use, or how many watt hours multiplied by 1,000 for kilowatts. How many watt hours did you use? Because watt hours is indeterminate of the source of the power. Keep in mind, amps, completely different. That's based on the battery. It's based on the source of the power. But kilowatts and watt hours are not based on it. This, together with Chapter 1, will allow us to go to Chapter 3, where we're going to take the real scenario of a real unit, and we're going to do the calculation of what size battery it is, and I'll see you there. All right, welcome back to Chapter 3. This is where we get into the fun part. We take a real example, and I'm going to try to use some live examples that I have that we can use as an example to work this out and to figure out some simple calculations you might want to know in order to build out a battery system and kind of estimate. And some of these things are preference. Some of these things are just preference, and I'll explain what that means. So let's start off with use case number 1. I'm going to take my RV and use it as use case number 1. My RV in day-to-day scenarios is using a 50 amp outlet, and I used the original device that you saw in the previous chapter and that I linked to for the 50 amp 1450 plug. I used it originally, and my RV was running between 50 and 60 kilowatt hours a day. Now, when I saw this, I was quite surprised. Now, keep in mind, this was a 42-foot RV, and fifth wheel RV, and it had 2 of those big giant air conditioning units on the top that make all that damn noise that you can't seem to get away from. I ran them like I normally would, just like I do today with my normal mini splits and stuff like that. And I realized that what was happening here is that the air conditioners were the hugest impact on it. Now, I audited this with the 240 volt tool and ran this for multiple days, took multiple pictures of the meter, would compare them from day to day, built charts, understood when I run the air conditioner this way, when I set it that way, this is what happens. So there was no question that this is what I was pulling from it, and this allowed me to do it while I was traveling in the RV. So I would pull into a spot, I would plug in the normal 50 amp to my meter, and then plug my RV into the meter, and then that would allow me to do it. Today, after I changed out the air conditioners and all that stuff, I run between 18 and 21 kilowatt hours a day, as long as I stay away from things like using electric hot water heaters and stuff like that. Today, I run everything through it. So I add the hot water heater in, which is about 4 kilowatts a day, 4 to 5 kilowatts a day. Let's call it 5, and say it's 26 kilowatts a day is a pretty good average of where I currently am. This was originally pulled using the Audit, the 240 Audit device. And what I did is I took this and said, okay, what size battery am I going to need to run this? Now, if I've got 2,600 kilowatts a day, I know I have 26,000, let's do that correctly, 26,000 watt hours, which is 26 kilowatts a day. So my thought is that there's going to be some solar coming in, and this is where it starts getting into real preferences. Most people like to say they would like to have 2 days or 3 days in reserve in case it rains or snows or bad weather or whatnot. I was more interested in saying I want to be able to run. I was going to be plugged in most of the time, and I was more interested in being able to say I want to make it through the night. And if I can make it through the night, then I can have the solar charge me up during the day and run everything during the day. So I needed to make sure that I could pull enough power to run me during the day. So we would have night here, and we would have day here. I want it to run on solar here and charge here, and then run on batteries here. So I determined that if I could get through the solar panels, I was going to put on 10 370 watt panels, which is 3,700 watts of power, or 3.7 kilowatts of power. And that meant that I was going to be able to pull, on a good day, which is this, assuming this is the same day as this usage here, I would be able to pull approximately from these panels about 6 times this was 18, it was about 20 kilowatts a day, kilowatt hours. So that was kind of the rough estimate that I did, because I really didn't know how many panels I was going to be able to get on the RV. I ordered 12 of them and assumed I would be able to get about 10 of them up there. I originally got 8 and then had to go back and find room for the last 2. So this ended up being a little bit better than I expected. I ended up being able to pull closer to 24 kilowatt hours in a good day than my original 20. But my question was, if I could pull 20 in a day, then chances are I could recover from most days. I may come up a little bit short, but I needed to figure out what kind of battery. Then it came down to cost. That was what was the real problem here, is how much does it cost to have enough battery to do this? I ended up with 3 100 amp hour 48 volt batteries. Now, a 48 volt battery isn't really running at 48 volts. It's running at 51.2 or whatever that it is they do. And it ends up taking, if you take their nominal voltage, which is 51.2, it ends up being 5,120 watt hour battery. So I had 5,120 watt hour battery. So what I needed to be able to do is to hold off, if I use less power during the day, hold off a bit so I could actually have enough to recharge the batteries and do it on the absolute minimum that I could do. I wanted to be able to boondock, and if I was boondocking, then I wouldn't be using the full 26 power. Keep in mind, this was full-on air conditioners, the whole shebang, everything running constantly nonstop. So I determined that I could get by with approximately 10 to 15 kilowatts a day. And the way I did that is I said, look, if I trim this down, I can operate on 10 if I turn off I can operate on actually about 6 if I turn off the air conditioners. So that would allow me in an emergency situation to still have coffee, to still have everything else I needed. And if I turned off the water, I would be down, down at the 4 and 5 zone of kilowatt usage. So the idea here is that I took the 5 batteries that I had and put in 15 kilowatt hours based on I needed 26 to run a full day, but I would be able to use, during the day, I would be able to basically split this and put 10 of it back into the battery. If I generated 20, 10 of it would go back, giving me one more full day, 15 plus the 10. So this was a use case that was based on some elements of I wasn't looking for backup power to run me during a rainy day. I was looking for how am I going to make it through the night, and if I had to use power, electric power, then I would. So this was a good use case of how much power did I really need versus how much could I possibly use. Because 26 kilowatts is basically balls to the walls, turn everything on and run it like crazy. It was very easy to get this down to 18. It was pretty simple to get it to 12. It's pretty, if in an emergency, I could be at 4 or 5. So it wasn't a big deal. that is use case 1, and what I ended up with was 300 amp hours, which made sure that I had 15 kilowatts to get me all the way through the night, and then get either most of it recharged the next day, or at least I would be around to run a generator if I needed to, or whatnot. If it was cooler weather and the air conditioners weren't running, then I knew I would be able to recover each day and do it. So I kind of built a balance in there to where in order to get everything, I probably needed 5 or 6 batteries. I got 3. I was started at 0, and my power usage would probably go like this, depending on where I was each day, and how cold it, how hot it was, how cold it was, how much air conditioning, how much heat I would need, so on and so forth. If I had the hot water heater on, if the sun was shining, if it was raining, there were so many elements in there that I tried to balance it in the middle, saying I'm going to use a generator occasionally, and that's just a fact of life. Okay, that was use case 1. Now, let's look at use case 2. This is a much simpler use case. This is a coffee trailer that has 1 freezer and 1 refrige. Now, I can tell you that this freezer uses about 1.2 kilowatts hours a day, and the refrigerator was using 1.4 kilowatt hours a day. I knew that the surge on this, I was going to need to run a 2,000 watt inverter in order to do these. Neither one of them ran at much more than like 100. This one was, I think, 100 watts, and this one was only 73 or something like that. So they ran really low once they were operating, but at the same time they were had some bad surge, so I had to go with a bigger inverter to get this to go. But what it allowed me to do is to take these and use the device that I showed you earlier to run the refrigerators for a couple of days. Plugged them in, left it sitting in the plugged in, let the refrigerators just run and cycle. I would go in during the day and pretend that we used the place and then shut it off, just let them run all night, all day for a couple of weeks, and it came up with these fairly decent averages. So what I determined that I needed to do is that it needed to survive from the sundown the next day, and technically what I wanted to do is that I was at a fair, and at the fair would end and I would have power connected, but when the fair shuts down, most of the time you lose power. And I didn't like packing up my complete food truck, unsetting up everything. We're at a fair. We can leave everything there, but you lose power. So what I wanted to be able to do is just shut everything down, put everything in the freezers and the refrigerator, leave for the night, come back in the morning, and hopefully the power would be either back on already or it would come back on. So I really didn't need to operate for more than from about 8 p.m. to the next day at 11 or 12 o'clock at the latest. So this gave me a window here of I needed to run this thing for about 12 plus 4, 16 hours. Now, 16 hours of these two usage over a period of a day is basically 16 hours. 16 divided by 24 is about 66% of the usage in order to operate from one day to the next, assuming the power would come back on and I would have full sun to charge. I didn't have to worry about charging. I knew that was going to happen. If it didn't happen, the power would be on. I could actually use an electric charger for it that way. So here, the use case is completely different. I don't have to worry about anything because I'm going to have power in the next day, or I'm going to have full sun and I'm going to be able to charge that way. So I really needed this window of 16 hours only. So the question became, if I have 1.2 or 1.4, I have 2.6 kilowatt hours, which is 2,600 watt hours. I have not rehearsed this, so I'm doing this math off the top of my head, and I'm coming up with the scenarios off the top of my head. So please forgive me if I make some mistakes, and we have to go back and correct a few of those. So 2,600 watt hours relates to how many watt hours I need. What I wanted to determine is I knew that I didn't want to go with 12 volts, because 12 volts with a 2,000 watt inverter, which coincidentally allowed me when I was driving up to some shows to flip on the espresso machine and run the espresso machine before I got there, which is why I went with such a big inverter, in addition to the surge to turn these on. But that's neither here nor there. That was part of the use case, though, is I wanted to be able to flip on that espresso machine, and when I'm driving to a show, let's say it's an event at a park, it's only one nighter, that allowed me to get there, my 30-minute drive there. When I got there, the espresso machine was already hot. It ran at about 1,400 watts, so it really allowed me to cheat a little bit, so I didn't have to wait for things to heat up when I got there. But here, I needed 16 hours, or 66% of 2.8, which is this here. So if 2,600 watt hours, and I only need 66% of it, times 0.66, I need 1,716, 1,716 watt hours. Now, this told me that I needed to figure out how many 24-volt batteries, how much 24-volt battery I need. Now, we know that batteries are bought with amp hours. And we know that 24 volts tells you how many amps. So what I needed to know is how many amp hours is this. So we just take this and divide it by 24, because we're going to be using a 24-volt battery. And I went ahead, and I know that a lithium battery is not 24 volts, no more than a 48-volt battery is 48 volts. It's 51.2. But I did that anyway to leave some fudge room in there for inverter conversions and stuff like that. So basically, we're going to take the math here, and we're going to do the 1760 watt hours, and we are going to divide that by 24, and that is 71.5 amps hours that is needed to run these two refrigerators during that time. So what I did is I bought two 100 amp hour 12-volt batteries, put them in series to make a 24-volt 100 amp hour battery, allowing me to get to the 1,760 watt hours that I needed at 24 volts, turned into a 71.5, and that left me some room if I was late, if the power didn't come on, if the batteries weren't completely charged, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. This case scenario worked perfectly, meaning after a while, I took out one of the refrigerator and left only the freezer here. We just used ice out of the refrigerator because it was so much more efficient than having two devices. But as it turns out, the calculations here worked really well, because now overnight it goes down to about 70%, and then I've got enough power there. If the power's not on yet, I can still turn on the espresso machine and juice that up to full strength while the power gets turned on at a fair or whatnot. So this is use case 2. I hope this has been useful for you. We went through all three phases on how power calculations are done, how you can measure that power, and then here we go through two use cases, an RV and a coffee trailer with two totally different needs involved. I hope that this is great, and if it's been useful for you, please subscribe and please like. It helps tremendously to encourage me to make more of these videos. As you can imagine, this one is fairly involved, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope to see you on there. I hope to see you at the next video. For those of you that are already subscribers, thank you. I do appreciate it, and we will see you at the next video, and have a good day. Thanks to all of my subscribers. I really do appreciate you a lot. And for those that are still here, check out this video. Which way is it? This way. Check out this video. It is very much related to the same series. It's the next part or the last part, depending on if this has already been out and how long it's been out. Like and subscribe. Thanks a lot. Y'all have a good day.